Big Shaq's son hadn't stopped crying for weeks, until the new nanny held him and began to sing. The melody was soft, familiar. Too familiar. It was the lullaby his wife used to hum, one no one else should have known. As memories stir and hidden truths unravel, Shaq realizes this nanny didn't just calm his child. She stirred a past that never let go. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal watched the golden Florida sun dip through the wide windows of his grand living room as he sat on the plush ivory couch, scrolling absent-mindedly through documents on his tablet. Contracts, charity summaries, endorsements, all the trappings of his millionaire life lay before him, yet none of it weighed heavier on his heart than the silence that filled the room. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the hollow emptiness that echoed in every corner of his luxurious estate. He glanced at the framed photos lining the mantelpiece. Taylor, his late wife, smiling radiantly at their son, Lennox, on his second birthday. Shaq pressed his thumb against the cool glass, longing for moments he couldn't retrieve. Lennox's laughter, bright and spontaneous, usually brought warmth back into the mansion. Even at his young age, the boy had a spark light, like his mother. But today had been different. Shaq sensed Lennox's awkward, jittery pacing as he walked across the foyer earlier, his small brow furrowed. "Daddy," Lennox had said, voice cracking slightly. "Why does it feel empty in here?" Shaq had drawn him close, smoothed his curls, and answered with carefully measured reassurance. Yet something didn't settle right in his son's soul. It was as if the mansion itself mourned alongside them. Lennox had hidden in the library for a while, a place they rarely used anymore. Shaq suspected that the boy sensed the weight of his absence, the void Taylor left behind. Shaq rose now, abandoning his tablet, and walked across the high-polished marble floor toward the hallway. His heart thudded. He could hear Lennox's soft sobs, different from cries of scraped knees or bedtime fears. These were deeper, more profound. Shaq hesitated at the threshold of the library door, inhaled the scent of aged books, and stepped inside. Lennox sat on the edge of the window seat, face buried in his hands, shoulders shaking. A single ray of sunlight illuminated dust motes floating around him, as though the world had paused just to focus on his pain. Shaq knelt beside him, wrapping his large arms around his son, feeling Lennox tremble. He whispered, "Hey, big man. What's wrong?" The boy's body shook, uncharacteristically silent. Minutes passed before Lennox whispered, "I miss her. I miss Mommy." Shaq's throat clenched. He tightened his hold. "Me too, buddy. Me too." He tilted Lennox's chin gently, meeting those tear-soaked eyes. "Tell me what's hurting." Lennox sniffed violently, daubed his face with the back of his hand, then closed his eyes. "It's like the house is too big, and it's too quiet, and I feel lost without her voice." Shaq swallowed, pain slicing through his chest. He'd built them a dream life, but dreams without Taylor were only half alive. Over the next hour, Shaq stayed beside Lennox, guiding him through soft memories, sunny mornings making pancakes, Taylor's gentle hum as she braided his hair, bedtime stories that ended with Taylor tucking them in. Shaq's voice cracked at the edges, but he pressed on. He could feel Lennox's sobs begin to soften. The boy nestled closer. And yet as the last tears dried and Lennox's breathing steadied, Shaq noticed the tremor in his own heart. He had done this before for playoff losses, championship wins, public scandals, but never to console the deepest wound, a mother's absence. When Lennox finally looked up at him, eyes puffy but steadier, Shaq kissed his forehead. "You're brave, Lennox. You're so brave." The boy tried a half smile. Shaq guided him out of the library and into the open hall. The mansion's high ceilings and wide staircases no longer felt cavernous, but still they echoed with Taylor's absence. He paused, surveying the grand foyer. Every luxury, a globe-shaped chandelier, marble floors, priceless art, felt like a monument to what was missing. Fame couldn't protect them from grief. Money couldn't fill their hearts. Shaq led Lennox to the sun-drenched breakfast nook, where a single waffle lay on a plate, half-eaten. "Finish this," Shaq urged gently. Lennox hesitated, then pushed the plate forward. Shaq sat across, watching his son chew slowly. He thought about the countless nannies they'd hired over the years, competent, caring, but none who could reach Lennox's soul in a moment like this. He wondered how or if they could truly heal. Shaq knew his own grief was well hidden from the world. The public saw Big Shaq, the champion athlete, the entertainer, the businessman. They didn't see the man staring back from the mirror, haunted by words unsaid to Taylor, fearful he would fail Lennox completely. He remembered the countless nights lying awake, memories racing like game film on repeat. He longed for forgiveness, for purpose, for something beyond his celebrity. Lennox finished the waffle, then laid his head on the table, exhausted. Shaq gently picked him up. The boy's small body relaxed in his arms as they walked down the hallway toward Lennox's room. Shaq paused at the doorway to look back over the breakfast nook. That single sunbeam hitting the table was like a spotlight through the darkness. He thought of his father, Lucille's endless push to be strong, the way Taylor had taught him that real strength sometimes meant showing weakness. He realized that this moment, this raw, aching connection with his son, was what held them together. Not his championships, not his fortune, not his fame. Inside Lennox's softly lit room, Shaq tucked him into bed. Smooth sheets scented with fresh linen. Lennox hugged his favorite stuffed bear close. Shaq sat on the edge of the bed, brushing back Lennox's curls. He whispered, "You know, your mom would be proud of you today, proud of how you faced the hard stuff." Lennox nodded sleepily. "Tell me about her," he murmured. Shaq looked down, a wave of emotion crashing over him. She loved the ocean. She said its waves reminded her of life, ever-changing, powerful, and beautiful even when it's rough. Lennox closed his eyes. Shaq leaned forward, pressed a soft kiss to Lennox's temple, then whispered, "Good night, little man." He turned off the lamp and stepped to the door. As he reached the hallway, Shaq paused. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. He realized then that something had shifted. The cry that shook the mansion had done more than disturb the polished facade. It had cracked it open. In that crack, healing could grow. He would find someone who could help Lennox, someone who understood grief, who could connect, who wouldn't shy away from the tears. Shutting the door quietly, Shaq descended the stairs to the foyer. Soft click of his dress shoes on marble. He paused beneath the chandelier and exhaled. The world outside would expect his next move, a return to contracts, appearances, endorsements. But tonight he would do something different. He would search for someone who could fill this void with more than routine care, someone who could touch the soul of his boy, someone who could help them both breathe again, in a mansion of echoes. He stood under the glow of the chandelier, silent tears shimmering at the corners of his eyes. The cry had stirred more than Lennox's sorrow. It had stirred purpose in Shaq. He vowed, here and now, that he would not let this moment slip into another day of emptiness. He would act, and he would not stop until their hearts felt like home again. The agency call came 2 days after Lennox's breakdown. A call Shaq hadn't truly expected to answer. He'd turned down every other candidate before. Their voices had sounded too mechanical, their words too polished, their smiles too forced. But this voice, low, warm, and deliberate, was different. "Mr. O'Neill, we believe Camille Ross might be uniquely suited to your situation." He hesitated. "What makes you different?" The agency paused. "She's experienced, in ways that go beyond professional training." They didn't elaborate, and Shaq didn't ask. He simply said, "Send her tomorrow." When the black town car pulled up to the estate's winding driveway, Shaq stood at the threshold of the great room. Arms folded, eyes locked on the front entrance. Lennox clung to the edge of the banister upstairs, watching in nervous silence. The door opened with a subtle click, and Camille Ross stepped inside. Mid-30s, statuesque but gentle in posture, she wore a muted navy blouse and slate gray trousers. Her hair swept neatly back. Her presence wasn't loud, but it shifted the energy in the room instantly. She smiled, not wide, not rehearsed, but honest, and her eyes carried something else: history. Shaq observed her closely, noting the poise in her walk, the way she glanced not at the grandeur of the estate, but at the small signs of life. Lennox's toy car parked beside a flower vase, the faint fingerprints on the glass railing, the photograph of Taylor by the grand piano. When she spoke, her voice felt like a worn lullaby, soft, reassuring, and old in a way that wasn't about age. "Mr. O'Neill," she said, offering her hand, "it's a pleasure to meet you. I hope I'm the right kind of help." Shaq nodded slowly, unsure why her words stirred unease within him. There was nothing alarming about her, and yet something in the timbre of her voice, it brushed against memory. He couldn't place it. Before he could speak, Lennox crept down the stairs. Camille turned toward him, her expression easing into something warmer, more natural. She crouched down to his level, offering not a greeting, but silence, waiting for him to come forward. Shaq felt the tension ripple through his son, and then astonishingly, it melted. Lennox stepped into her arms like a returning traveler. Camille wrapped him gently, as though she already knew the weight he carried. Shaq's breath caught. It was too seamless, too instant. The boy who had cried inconsolably just 2 nights ago now rested against her with his eyes fluttering closed. Camille met Shaq's gaze across the room, her arms still around Lennox. And there it was, that flicker. A familiarity. Not recognition, exactly, but something adjacent to it, like a name on the tip of your tongue. Over the next hour, Camille navigated the house with quiet assurance. She asked no unnecessary questions. She didn't compliment the furniture, or ask about Shaq's career. Instead, she learned the home, like a rhythm, each hallway a stanza, each photo a lyric. She found the kitchen, prepared a warm drink for Lennox, and hummed while the kettle warmed. Shaq lingered nearby, pretending to be busy on his phone, but every note of her humming made his spine stiffen. It was a tune he knew, deeply, one Taylor used to hum when folding laundry or soothing Lennox as a baby. He couldn't stand it anymore. "You know that melody?" he asked, not lifting his eyes from his phone. Camille turned, slow and deliberate. "It's something my mother used to sing," she said gently. "Old Southern lullaby, I think." But Shaq knew every inch of Taylor's past. Her mother had been an opera teacher. No Southern lullabies in her lineage. He made a mental note, tucked it away. As the day unfolded, Shaq retreated to his office, watching from the hallway, as Camille and Lennox played a quiet matching game on the floor. Lennox giggled, genuinely for the first time in weeks. Shaq leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a quiet war unfolding inside him, gratitude tangled with suspicion. Something about Camille didn't add up, and yet, how could he question what his son clearly needed? That evening, Camille declined the guest wing, asking instead to be near Lennox's room if he had nightmares. "Just until he settles," she said. Shaq agreed, reluctantly, assigning her the bedroom adjacent to his son's. After tucking Lennox in, Camille lingered at the hallway window. "It's strange," she said, turning. "This house feels familiar." Shaq's pulse quickened. "You've never been here before?" Camille shook her head slowly. "Not in this life," she said with a half smile. And though the words were light, they dropped into the silence like a stone. Later that night, Shaq lay in bed, eyes open. He thought about the sound of Camille's voice, the lullaby, the way Lennox melted into her arms. He pulled out his phone and searched her name. Nothing unusual. Clean record, standard certifications, no social media. But his gut gnawed at him. He pulled out an old album, one Taylor had kept hidden, the one she said contained parts of her childhood she wasn't proud of. Shaq hadn't opened it since the funeral. He flipped through faded photos. Then one image caught him. A blurry background shot at Taylor's 13th birthday. The focus was Taylor and her cousins gathered around a cake. But in the corner, near the edge of the frame, there she was, Camille. Or someone who looked exactly like her. Too young, too far back in time, but unmistakable. Shaq sat upright. The album slipped from his lap to the floor. The next morning, Shaq entered the kitchen with purpose. Camille was already there, flipping pancakes for Lennox, who sat cross-legged on the counter, grinning. Shaq cleared his throat. "Camille, can we talk?" Her eyes met his. Calm, patient. "Of course." He gestured to the hallway, and she followed, hands wiping clean on a towel. "You've been here before," he said. Not a question. Camille studied him for a long moment. "Not here exactly," she answered. "But yes, I've known someone who lived this life." Shaq waited. She didn't elaborate. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked. "That we're not strangers." Shaq felt like the ground beneath him shifted just slightly. "I want to know who you really are." Camille's smile faded. "I'll tell you everything, Mr. O'Neill. But not all at once." She glanced back toward the kitchen. "Let him have peace, at least for a little while. He's needed it." Shaq stood frozen in the hallway, as she returned to the boy who laughed. Now without shadow, there was no threat in her, no harm, and yet a mystery wrapped itself around her presence. She wasn't what she seemed, but for now, Lennox was happy. And for now, Shaq would wait, watch, listen. The truth would come. It always did. And when it did, he had a feeling it would change everything he thought he knew about Taylor, about the past and about the woman who now stood in his kitchen, humming lullabies that only ghosts should know. Camille had only been in the house a few days, but something about the air had changed. The walls, once echoing with emptiness and the weight of unresolved grief, now felt like they were slowly absorbing warmth again. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but subtle, measured in Lennox's laughter that now floated up the stairs like rays of morning light, and in the way Shaq caught himself watching doorways more closely, half expecting Camille to walk through them with that unnerving calm that never seemed to crack. Lennox had taken to Camille with the kind of trust children give, only when their souls recognize safety. He clung to her when sad, followed her voice when unsure, and mimicked her mannerisms without realizing it. She didn't play with him in the boisterous, overly cheerful way past nannies had tried. Instead, she engaged him with quiet attention, eye-level respect, and a soft patience that felt older, wiser, and somehow haunting. Shaq found himself orbiting their interactions, standing just outside the frame. He'd linger in doorways, phone in hand, pretending to check emails, while his ears stayed tuned to the sounds Camille made when she thought no one was listening. That's when the melodies started. Not always lyrics, sometimes just a hum, long and melodic, threading through the hallways like a scent. The first time he heard it, he froze mid-step in the hallway. It wasn't just similar to the song Taylor used to sing, "My Sweet Golden Baby." It was identical, right down to the timing, the tone, the soft breath at the end of the phrase. He leaned against the wall, heart pounding, convinced for a split second that his mind was playing tricks on him. But then Camille's voice floated again, softer this time, and Lennox's giggle followed. Shaq swallowed hard, straightened, and walked into the playroom. Camille looked up from where she was helping Lennox with a wooden puzzle. Her smile was gentle, unfazed. "Everything all right?" she asked. He nodded slowly, then sat across from them. "That song," he said, trying to keep his tone even. "What's it called?" Camille didn't pause, but she didn't answer either. She picked up another puzzle piece and passed it to Lennox. "Just something from my childhood," she said simply. "Old song. I don't know if it even has a name." Shaq didn't press, but something coiled inside him. Taylor had written that lullaby herself, scribbled the lyrics on the back of a grocery receipt, after Lennox was born. She'd never recorded it, never performed it, never shared it outside their home. He was sure of that, which meant Camille shouldn't know it. Not unless. He rose without a word, and walked back to his study. The closed door didn't muffle the sound of her voice entirely, and even when the melody faded, it echoed inside his head. That night, he sat at his desk long after Lennox had gone to sleep. He replayed old voicemails Taylor had left, just to hear her voice again. Then he pulled out her journals, the ones she'd left behind in a locked drawer he hadn't dared to open in months. He flipped through page after page, looking for some mention of Camille, of a childhood friend or distant relative, anything. But there was nothing. The next morning, over breakfast, he watched Camille closely. She moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd lived there for years, even though it had barely been a week. Lennox chatted away about a dream he'd had, his feet kicking beneath the table, completely at ease. Camille laughed at his stories, added a splash of milk to his cereal the exact way Taylor used to, and then hummed again while she wiped down the counter. Shaq cut in. "You ever meet Taylor?" he asked bluntly. Camille looked up. For a moment the question hovered between them. "No," she said after a beat, not missing a step in her routine. "But I know of her. Anyone who's lived in this state and cared about black excellence knows who Taylor Lawson O'Neill was." It was a perfectly crafted answer. Respectful, plausible, but too smooth. He nodded, letting the silence stretch. "Do you ever study music?" Camille turned, a faint smile playing on her lips. "A bit. Choir in high school. Sang with my grandmother in church when I was young." Her voice stayed steady, but there was something behind it, a subtle flicker in her eye that didn't match the lightness of her tone. Shaq let it go for now, but he was keeping track. That afternoon, while Lennox napped, Shaq approached her in the garden. Camille was sitting on the edge of a low stone wall, pruning a lavender bush Lennox had helped plant last spring. Shaq sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. "You have a good memory for songs," he said, "especially ones that aren't recorded anywhere." Camille didn't look at him. She snipped another stem, gathered the loose flowers into a small bundle, and finally replied, "Sometimes music sticks with you, even if you don't know where you first heard it." Shaq turned to face her fully. "But you do know, don't you?" His voice was low, not accusing, just searching. Camille exhaled, the soft sound almost lost in the breeze. There are things we carry, she said. Memories that aren't ours. Sounds that live in the bones. She met his gaze then, her eyes deep and steady. And some people are just meant to cross paths. It wasn't an answer. Not really. But it shut the conversation down. Camille stood, the lavender bundle in hand, and walked back toward the house. Shaq remained seated, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the garden stones. He didn't know what unnerved him more, the mystery of Camille's knowledge, or the possibility that he already believed her presence in their lives wasn't coincidence. That night, he checked the baby monitor even though Lennox hadn't stirred. He adjusted the camera angle slightly, and caught a glimpse of Camille sitting just outside the boy's room, book in hand, reading quietly. She wasn't pretending, she wasn't posturing, she was simply there. And Lennox, safe in his dreams, never stirred once. Shaq returned to his room, and lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. The melody she hummed played over and over in his head, not like a tune stuck in memory, but like a puzzle with a missing piece. He knew he was getting closer to something, and the edges of that something were too sharp to ignore. There were shadows in Camille's voice. Ghosts, maybe. Secrets, definitely. But he couldn't deny that in every echo of her presence, Lennox seemed lighter, safer, whole. The question that haunted Shaq wasn't just who Camille was. It was why her arrival felt less like a beginning and more like the unlocking of a door that had long been waiting to open. Shaq hadn't been looking for it. Not really. It was one of those nights where the mansion felt too large and too still, the kind of silence that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. Lennox had fallen asleep hours earlier, curled beside a worn picture book Camille had read to him. Shaq, restless and full of questions he couldn't shake, wandered into the study. The room still held Taylor's scent, faint but lingering in the old wood and fabric. He drifted to the cabinet near the fireplace, the one he hadn't opened in years. Inside was a leather-bound box labeled simply T's Past. Taylor had always been reluctant to talk about her childhood in detail. She'd painted it in broad strokes: a strict upbringing, family secrets, a mother she lost young, and a stepfather she rarely mentioned. He opened the box slowly. Inside, photographs layered in no particular order stared up at him, faded with time, but full of emotion. One photo in particular caught his eye. Taylor was standing beside a stately white woman at what looked like a summer garden party, perhaps in the late 90s. She couldn't have been older than 16. Her arm was looped around the woman's waist, smiling with the forced politeness of someone playing a role. But it wasn't Taylor or the woman who caught Shaq's breath. It was the figure in the far background, barely visible but unmistakable. Dressed in a faded housemaid's uniform, stood a much younger Camille Ross. She wasn't facing the camera, but her profile was clear enough. The same cheekbones, the same quiet posture. She was adjusting a tray on the patio table, half shadowed by a tall rosebush. Shaq turned the photo over. On the back, scrawled in Taylor's neat handwriting, was the date, June. His hand tightened around the edges. Camille had told him she was 36, which meant she would have been 8 or 9 at that time. But the woman in this photo wasn't a child. She looked at least in her late teens, maybe older. Shaq stared at the image for long minutes, heart thudding as the timelines refused to align. Something wasn't right. He paced the study, trying to keep his thoughts from spiraling. Who was Camille, really? Why did she lie about her age? Or more disturbingly, why did she appear in a photo that didn't make logical sense? He needed answers, real ones, not intuition, not coincidence. The next morning, while Lennox and Camille were in the garden, Shaq called in a favor. An old friend from college, now a private investigator, owed him more than one. "I need everything you can find on Camille Ross," Shaq said, "and I mean everything. Past aliases, employment history, anything sealed or otherwise." The investigator didn't ask questions, just said you'll have it within 48 hours. Shaq spent those 2 days watching Camille with new eyes. She still moved with that eerie grace, still soothed Lennox like no one else could. But now, every gesture felt double-edged, kindness draped over secrets. On the second night, the investigator called back. "I had to dig deep, most of it was scrubbed," he said, "but I found something buried under a different name. Camille Ross was once known as Alana Cree." Shaq froze. The name meant nothing to him. "Go on," he said. The investigator's voice shifted lower. Alana Creed was employed in a juvenile facility outside Tallahassee in the early 2000s. Not as a counselor, she was in the records department, technically, but she was implicated in a scandal. A child from a politically connected family went missing for 48 hours. No charges stuck, but she resigned, changed her name soon after. Shaq's breath left his chest in a quiet exhale. "You're sure it's the same person?" he asked. "Photos, fingerprints, everything." She legally became Camille Ross in 2007. The investigator confirmed. Been clean ever since. Not even a speeding ticket. But she's buried more than one version of herself. That night, Shaq didn't sleep. He sat at the dining table long after Camille and Lennox had gone to bed. The photo lay in front of him. Her face quiet, poised, peripheral now seemed like the ghost of someone trying to stay hidden. He thought about confronting her. He even rehearsed the word, but something inside him hesitated. The next morning, he asked her casually over breakfast, "You ever live up near Tallahassee?" Camille's spoon paused in Lennox's oatmeal, just briefly. "No," she said without looking up. "Too far north for me. I like the warmth." It was a perfect deflection. Too perfect. Shaq didn't press, but the fracture was there. He'd seen it. Later, while Camille read to Lennox on the couch, Shaq went back to the study. He found the old binder of Taylor's college essays and flipped to the section where she had written about her summer jobs. One entry stood out. "The woman who worked in my grandmother's house that summer. I never caught her name, but she hummed the same song every morning, and I still remember the sound." He stared at the line, stunned. Even Taylor had felt the echo of that presence, but she'd never connected the debts. Or maybe she had, and chose not to. That night, Shaq stood at the edge of the hallway, listening. Camille was humming again, folding towels at the end of the corridor. The same tune Taylor wrote about. The same one Lennox now associated with comfort. He walked up slowly. "Camille," he said. She turned, calm. "That photo," he continued. "The one from Taylor's youth. You're in it." She didn't flinch, didn't deny. Her hand stilled, resting gently on the towel in her lap. "I wondered how long it would take you to find it," she said quietly. "I didn't lie to hurt you, Shaquille. I lied because truth isn't always a privilege we're given. Not people like me." "People like you," he repeated, voice low. She looked him in the eyes. "People who were erased, rewritten, used and discarded. I worked in that house. I knew Taylor, just a little. She was kind, curious, but I wasn't supposed to speak to her. I wasn't supposed to exist. Not in her world." "And the juvenile center?" Shaq asked. Camille closed her eyes briefly. "That boy, they said, I lost. He wasn't safe. I didn't abduct him. I protected him. I left the system because I saw what it does to children who don't have names that matter. I didn't want that to happen to anyone else." Silence stretched between them. Not hostile, just heavy. "I didn't come here to manipulate you," she added. "I came because I knew Lennox's pain. I recognized it the moment I saw him, and I knew the songs that soothed him because they soothed me too. Maybe not in the same lifetime, but close enough." Shaq didn't respond. Not immediately. He looked down the hall toward Lennox's room, then back at the woman in front of him, the stranger who'd become a lifeline in disguise. There was still more to know, more questions to ask. But for the first time he realized the scariest thing wasn't what she was hiding. It was how much truth might already be tied to her voice. Shaq stared at the transcript pages spread across his massive mahogany desk, the lamp's light catching the fine print and sending fragile shadows dancing across the lines. His private investigator had gone to great lengths, searching court archives, speaking to retired attorneys, even contacting Javier Diaz, the judge who'd presided over the Alana Creed case 2 decades ago. Shaq had requested it quietly, not wanting Camille to sense his breach of trust before he was certain. Now, as he read, the weight of her past settled around him like a gathering storm. The courtroom scene unfolded with relentless clarity. It was 2004, Leon County Courthouse. Camille then Alana sat at the defendant's table, her posture rigid, pale blouse pressed and immaculate, hands clasped together. Across from her sat the Chamberlain family, influential and well-connected, their attorneys polished with privilege. Their accusation was blunt and devastating. Alana Creed had abducted their 5-year-old niece. The child had reportedly vanished during a family gathering, and Alana, who had been caring for her, was the only adult unaccounted for. The prosecution alleged racial bias. The family's attorneys emphasized Alana's recklessness and borderline instability, insinuating she was unfit to care for a white child. Every argument dripped with subtle prejudice. One prosecutor asked her, "Is it your habit and creed to take children without consent?" Alana's reply was firm. "I was protecting her." Shaq leaned in, his pulse hammering. Protecting her became the catalyst for an explosive battle. The transcript revealed references to the child's behavior. Frightened and withdrawn, when Alana tried to hand her back distress lines in her face that weren't present in the girl's parents' testimony. Several witnesses spoke of the Chamberlain's tense exchange with Alana earlier, voices raised, words sharp, and yet those statements were edited out of the final hearing. The judge explained it away as irrelevant to the abduction claim, but Shaq sensed the erasure of context. As he flipped further, he came to the judge's ruling. Alana Creed was convicted on charges of custodial interference and neglect, sentenced to 2 years probation and community service, but the judge recognized inconsistencies in the timeline. Annexed to the order was a caveat: sentence shall be suspended if no further evidence emerges. 2 years later, the charges were dropped, but her reputation and her former identity had been irrevocably fractured. Shaq's hand tightened around the edge of the desk. He closed his eyes, replaying Camille's steady voice. She hadn't offered her story, he'd uncovered it. Now he read through the appeal file, where one affidavit stood out, from a social worker who'd witnessed the nervous panic in the child's face when pressured to speak in public. She'd later testified that Alana had defied the Chamberlains to shield the niece from being returned into a hostile environment, an environment where the child had witnessed racial taunts toward Alana. But this traumatized version of truth had never made it into the media, overshadowed by the Chamberlains' influence. Shaq paused, realizing the injustice was deeper than he imagined, not simply a broken legal verdict, but a weaponization of power and prejudice. Camille had been cast as the villain, forced to vanish, to change her name, to recede into anonymity and rebuild a life on borrowed identity. She'd lied about her history for survival. Shaq felt shame at being unaware, guilt at his own assumptions, empathy blossoming into something fierce. Late that night, Shaq walked the mansion's long hallways, clutching the transcript. He passed the framed awards, the championship rings encased in glass, the pictures with politicians and celebrities, and thought of how often success shields pain. He entered the library to find Camille sitting by the fireplace, reading quietly. Lennox slept nearby, curled in a chair with his stuffed bear. She looked up, mild concern in her eyes. He drew a breath and sat across from her. "Camille," he began softly. "I read the transcript." Camille braced herself, eyes steady. He continued, "There was more there, about your past. The trial, the child, the Chamberlains." He placed the folder on the table. She didn't flinch. He felt the hushed tension between them hum, louder than any collapse of silence. "I want to understand." Camille closed her book, laid it aside. The firelight flickered on her face, soft and composed. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she spoke, voice even, but heavy. "That moment changed everything. It took me years to heal, decades, really." She paused, taking a breath. "I loved children, loved their trust. When that little girl froze in my arms after her parents came back, I felt her fear more than I felt their relief. She looked at me like she'd lost me already." Shaq swallowed. He imagined Lennox's trust, so pure, such a fragile thing. She continued. "I left with her, a few blocks away, just to calm her, but in their panic they believed the worst. The court believed the worst. The judge had to placate a powerful family. The system collapsed me." Shaq reached for her hand. It trembled slightly. "I never intended to harm anyone," she said. "I wanted to protect." Tears cracked her voice. "I changed my name. I moved. I became someone else, so I could be near children again, without the shadow of that scandal." Shaq's heart constricted. He thought of potential headlines, of media storms, of forgotten crises, and invisible victims. "And now you're here," he said softly, "with Lennox." Camille's eyes shifted toward the sleeping boy. "I sensed his pain," she said. "It's the same kind of untethered grief. As soon as I held him, I knew I had to help him. And you?" Shaq nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice low. "Because I feared judgment, that you'd see me as broken, dangerous." She pressed her lips together. "I was afraid of being erased again." Shaq stood suddenly, crossing to the window that looked over the estate's moonlit grounds. "You've been nothing but a guardian here," he said, voice firm. Every day I've watched you give Lennox safety. You deserve to be known. He turned back, resolved. I'm not gonna let you hide anymore. Camille looked at him, hope and vulnerability warring in her gaze. He walked back, sat beside her again. Let's tell the truth, he said. Together. She nodded, head bowed, relief softening her shoulders. Over the next days, they planned carefully. Shaq consulted legal counsel to ensure any disclosures wouldn't trigger old restrictions. Camille agreed to give her testimony on her own experiences with racial bias and systemic failure. Curated but authentic, Shaq used his platform to advocate for reform in child protection systems, ensuring Camille's voice would be heard not as scandal but as testimony for change. The day they went public, Camille stood beside Shaq at a press event, held in the estate's garden. Behind them, Lennox held a small bouquet of wildflowers. Camille's voice trembled only once, when she spoke of protecting children under a broken system, of rebuilding her identity piece by piece. Shaq's gaze stayed firm, eyes locked on hers, proud, unwavering, and unafraid. When it was over, cameras flashed, questions buzzed, but Camille stood tall. The backlash from old critics came, predictable and cruel, but the support surged stronger. Parents, advocates, even some of the Chamberlain's former neighbors, voicing regret that injustice had bested awareness. Back inside later, Shaq hugged Camille. Lennox pulled from a nearby seat, flung his arms around both of them. For the first time in years, Camille realized she had roots again. Shaq realized that true guardianship wasn't about perfection. It was about truth, restoration, and courage. And Lennox realized what trust felt like, without shadows. In that moment, the scars behind the smiles were laid bare, but they no longer harmed. Instead, they became emblems of survival, healing, and the extraordinary power of unspoken truths, finally spoken aloud. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the kind where the Florida heat wrapped itself lazily around the mansion's wide verandas, and the air inside hung with the scent of sun-warmed citrus. Camille had stepped into the backyard with fresh lemonade in hand, instructing Lennox to play quietly in the living room, while she refilled the pitcher. Shaq was upstairs, reviewing a stack of community outreach plans for an upcoming speaking event. The house felt still, peaceful, but peace, like all things, is delicate. Lennox's curiosity, sharp as ever, pulled him to Camille's worn leather satchel, resting beside the couch. She usually tucked it away out of sight, but today it sat open, a corner of a deep red scarf peeking from the side. Lennox wasn't snooping, at least. That's what he'd tell himself later. He reached in looking for gum. What he pulled out instead was a small silver locket, dulled with age, cool against his fingers. The clasp had nearly rusted shut, but with the stubborn determination only a child could muster, he pried it open. Inside, behind the delicate filigree, was a photo, faded but clear. One side held the image of a young girl, no more than 16, smiling with a wide innocence in front of a flowered hedge. The other side froze Lennox's breath in his chest. It was his mother, Taylor, slightly older, face tilted with that knowing smile she used when calming him before bed. He didn't understand how Camille, his nanny, his friend, had a picture of her. This wasn't coincidence. This was secret. By the time Camille walked back into the room, the locket lay in Lennox's palm. Open. She stopped mid-step, her eyes locking onto it like it was a live wire. The lemonade pitcher nearly slipped from her hands. She set it down slowly. Where did you find that? Her voice was not angry, but something else. Wounded, soft. Lennox held it out. It was in your bag. Camille crossed the room with hesitant steps and knelt before him. Her hands reached for the locket, but hovered just short of taking it. You weren't supposed to see that, she whispered. Is that Mommy? Lennox asked, pointing. His voice cracked, confusion rising. Camille nodded, tears already forming. Yes. But how do you have it? He asked, eyes narrowing. Why is she in your locket? Camille sat down beside him on the couch, her composure fraying at the edges. Because she was my sister, Lennox. My half-sister. Shaq, halfway down the stairs after hearing the shift in Camille's tone, froze at the landing. He heard it, every word, and walked silently to the edge of the room. Camille looked up and saw him, but didn't stop. Maybe she knew it was time. I never got to know her. Not the way I wanted, she began, her voice trembling now. My mother, your grandmother, had me with someone her family didn't approve of. A black man. She was disowned, sent away. By the time she gave birth to me, She was alone and scared, and she never told anyone who my father really was. Taylor. Taylor came later, when she was brought back into the family's good graces, into their wealth, into their whiteness. But I was the secret. Lennox blinked, trying to piece it together. So you and Mommy, you were really sisters? Half-sisters, Camille corrected gently. Same mother, different fathers. But yes, your mother and I shared blood, and yet we were raised like strangers. Shaq stepped into the room now, slow and deliberate. Taylor never mentioned you, he said, and there was no accusation in it. Just sorrow. Not once. Camille nodded. Because she didn't know until much later. We met only once. Briefly. She was already in college. Our mother was ill on her deathbed, really, and she called both of us in. That was the day of the photo you found, Lennox. Your mom and I sat beside each other for an hour, talked like we'd known each other longer. We didn't have enough time. Shaq took a seat across from them, elbows on his knees, eyes never leaving Camille. Why didn't you say anything before? Camille closed the locket and cradled it in her hand like something sacred. Because I wasn't sure I'd be allowed to stay if I did, and I wanted to earn your trust the right way. Not by showing up with a story so heavy it collapses everything else. She looked down. I didn't want Taylor's memory to become a question mark. Lennox shifted closer to her, his voice small. Why didn't Mommy ever talk about you? Camille smiled sadly. Because by the time we met, she was dealing with so much already, trying to hold her new life together, fighting for causes bigger than us. And part of her, part of both of us, I think, was afraid of what connecting would cost. Shaq ran a hand over his face, exhaling deeply. So the songs, the lullabies, that wasn't a coincidence either. No, Camille said. Our mother used to hum them. I kept them close all these years, not knowing if I'd ever hear them again. When I heard Taylor hum them on a recording once, barely audible in a background interview, it felt like the universe cracked open. I knew then that some things do pass through blood, even in silence. Lennox held her hand now, clutching it tightly. Does that mean you're really my family? Camille nodded, tears now freely falling. Yes, baby, I am. In the deepest way. There was no dramatic swell of music, no movie-style hug, just stillness. And in that stillness, understanding settled like dust after a long storm. Lennox curled into her side without another word, and she wrapped an arm around him, burying her face in his hair. Shaq looked at them, the boy and the woman bound by truth, grief and the quiet resilience of love, rediscovered. The question still circled his mind, but one thing was clear. Camille had carried more than her own pain. She'd carried a hidden legacy, one stolen by prejudice, buried by generational silence. He stood, crossed to them, and gently took the locket from Camille's hand. He opened it once more, stared at Taylor's photo beside the young girl he now understood was Camille, and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. I think, he said quietly, it's time we make room for the whole truth in this house. Camille looked up, eyes wide. Are you sure? Shaq nodded. You're part of her story, and now you're part of his. He looked at Lennox. He deserves to know where he came from. All of it. That night, the locket sat on the mantel between candles, beside Taylor's framed portrait, and for the first time, Taylor wasn't alone in her memorial. She was joined by the sister she never had the chance to know fully. Honored not in secrecy, but in the presence of family that finally had a name and a place to belong. Shaq drove west of his mansion, past the manicured streets and sun-dappled palms, until the asphalt gave way to cracked pavement and weather-worn houses. The air grew heavy with dust and memory, and he felt the mansion's comfort fade within him. He'd asked Camille to come, but she declined, saying he needed to see this place with his own eyes. As he pulled to a stop outside a faded yellow bungalow on Florida Avenue, fingers clenched on the steering wheel, he braced himself, not for danger, but for revelation. The bungalow's paint was peeling, the windows boarded, and weeds surged through every crack in the sidewalk. A sagging porch roof gave the whole facade a defeated tilt. This was where Camille had spent her childhood, working quietly behind faculty's closed doors, her small hands dusting shelves for a living, before she even understood what living might mean. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. Instead, he noticed a faded sign half hidden by vines. Creed Juvenile Services, a service meant to help children, but served only to hide them. He remembered Camille had called it a prison for lost souls. He stepped inside anyway. The interior was dim, beams of afternoon sunlight filtering through gaps in the boards. He smelled mildew and old despair. The hallway walls once cheered with bright paint, but now sagged gray with neglect. He traced his hand along their surface, brushing away decades of dust, imagining Camille's small fingers doing the same, hoping a spark of warmth would remain. The rooms off the corridor opened into small cells, bare except for steel-framed cots, and the faint sketch of inmates' names etched in the walls. The ghosts here weren't supernatural. They were the lingered sorrow of children erased by bureaucracy. Shaq picked a notebook off one cot, flipped through the pages, scribbled lines, names crossed out, numbers instead, adages of resilience scrawled, next to pleas for help. Here, Camille had catalogued their voices, silent testimonies that never reached courts or front pages. He felt bile rise. This was not charity. This was containment. Outside the cell, he paused at a doorway with a wooden desk, a makeshift office. Files lay strewn about, folders labeled Alana Creed, an incident, Nadu 2 us, 16, Nadu 2. He opened the folder labeled Rai Disappearance of TL Waf. It contained juvenile reports, vague descriptions of a frightened child, but no context for why Camille had intervened. The official version, Alana Creed had taken the child off campus without authorization. But there in these tattered files, Shaq saw the missing pages cleaned from the record, notes on slurs heard in the hallways, warnings about staff bias, unreleased testimonies of racial slights on young children. Camille had tried to give voice to them, but her voice had been censored. He sank into a metal chair, reviewing the devastating evidence of hidden racism, systemic abuse, erased human worth. Camille's story was never just personal. It was emblematic, and her silence, her name change, was an act of survival. He felt a shift deep inside, anger for what she'd endured, remorse for his own doubting her, pride for her resilience. Up until now, he'd seen Camille through a lens of suspicion. Now he saw her through the lens of injustice. Shaq stood and walked through what had been a small playroom. Faded cartoon characters still clung to patched walls. A single ball lay in the corner, moon dulled. He closed his eyes, imagining the echo of children's voices, the hollow laughter behind barred windows. He tasted grief, heavy as July heat. His throat tightened, not from threat, but from empathy. His son Lennox had felt that pain once. Camille had recognized it in him, not because she was manipulative, but because she knew grief's language intimately. He left the bungalow and walked the abandoned lot beside it. Rusted swings creaked in the wind. The worn chain links squeaked mournfully. He touched one swing, its cold metal reminding him that wealth and privilege could never shield someone from erasure. He looked back at the building's silent facade and vowed to use his voice and influence to resurrect these stories. Their isolation would end. Back at the car, Shaq breathed hard. "I've been blind," he acknowledged. Blind to privilege, blind to power used as erasure, and blind to the legacy Camille carries silently. He started the engine and headed back, but this time his mind was racing with purpose. By the time he reached his driveway, dusk had drawn shadows across the lawn. Inside the mansion, he found Camille and Lennox reading on the floor. Lennox looked up at him, relief and curiosity in his eyes. Camille closed the book and offered a tentative smile. Shaq knelt and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for letting me see," he said quietly. "But it's not your story alone anymore." She nodded, eyes shining. He scooped Lennox in his arms. "We'll tell it together." The house seemed to exhale. Echoes of ghosts and grief did not vanish, but they no longer had to be hidden. Granite statues of judgment crumbled. In their place, foundations of understanding and justice took root. Shaq saw Camille anew, no longer an enigma, but a sibling of strength, purpose, and profound empathy. He realized she had come not to intrude, but to fill a void created by silence. That night, as he walked past the family portraits, he noticed Taylor's image softened with Camille's spirit now woven into the story. Their grief had opened doors to places untouched by truth. Healing, he understood, wasn't just about soothing wounds. It was about excavating hidden fractures and rebuilding foundations stronger than before. And on Florida Avenue, those foundations began. Outside, the mansion lights glowed warmly, a beacon of acceptance reborn. Inside, hearts shifted, the family now united by shared truth, shame turning into strength, ghosts transformed into guides. The marquee lights of the Orlando Civic Center glowed like beacons. In the warm evening air, drawing press photographers, activists, and curious onlookers from every corner of the state. Cameras lined the red carpet, flashes flickering as attendees arrived in tailored gowns and crisp suits. The event, titled Voices of Truth, was organized to amplify marginalized stories. A fitting stage, Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal believed, for Camille's first public appearance. He'd insisted they walk in together, side by side, as a family stepping into the spotlight not just for gain, but for justice. Inside, the auditorium glimmered with anticipation. A massive digital screen framed the stage, displaying a simple phrase, "Truth Unveiled." Shaq, Camille, and Lennox sat together on the front row. No hierarchy, no separation. Lennox clung to Camille, who smiled at him in reassurance. Shaq's presence was quiet, but unmistakable. Broad shoulders, stillness in his posture, a public figure anchored by private conviction. As the event began, hopeful murmurs rippled through the audience. The evening's host introduced Shaq, athlete, philanthropist, father. The crowd roared in approval. Cameras focused on Shaq as he took the stage with determined calm. "I've spent my life overcoming obstacles on courts and in boardrooms," he began, voice resonant across the packed hall. "But in my own home, there was a story I didn't fully understand, about grief, secrecy, and identity." He paused, then glanced back at Camille and Lennox. "I'm here tonight not for endorsements or trophies, but to support my son's aunt, someone whose voice demands to be heard." When he introduced Camille, the hush was palpable. She rose, hands steady, and walked to center stage. Her dress was modest yet dignified, a reflection of strength rather than show. Shaq took a seat beside Lennox and watched as his eyes followed her movements, small but full of pride. Camille took a deep breath, then began. "My name is Camille Ross," she said. She paused again, waving for silence that had fallen over the room. "I'm also known by another name, given at birth, before an accident of prejudice erased me from my own family's history." She told them who she was, half-sister to Taylor Lawson O'Neal, now proudly aunt to Lennox. She spoke of the secret that began with wealth and power, the white grandfather who chose comfort over kin, the childhood of invisibility, and the redemptive moment when she reconnected with Taylor, small and brief as it was. She described the juvenile center, not with flourish, but with the quiet clarity of someone who'd walked its corridors, not as a villain, but as a woman who'd protected a frightened child in its walls. She spoke of the trial that rebranded her as dangerous, of names changed, futures redirected. As she told the story of that lost niece and her own resilience, the audience held its breath when she said, "I didn't lose that girl. I saved her. I saved myself." The hush vibrated with powerful emotion. Then she turned to Shaq. "And I found another child in his household. My nephew named Lennox." The camera cut to him in the audience. He hugged Camille instinctively. "I saw in him the same grief, the same longing I carried. So I came home. I came to help fill that void." Silence. Only the projector's soft glow and the buzz of recording devices. The audience rose to its feet in a wave of applause. Not polite, not obligatory, but indelible. Shaq stepped back on stage to stand beside her as they faced a sea of faces changed by her presence. A hush of collective affirmation fell over the hall. They saw not a nanny or caretaker, but a truth-teller shaped by pain and perseverance. After an intermission, a moderated panel followed. Sean, a social justice advocate, posed a series of questions about race, identity, and the power of narrative. Camille was steady, at times emotional, but unshakable. She urged the audience to lift voices silenced by wealth and prejudice, to rethink the narratives assigned to those who live in the shadows of privilege. "She's not an anomaly," Shaq said when asked whether Camille's experience was rare. "She's too familiar. Her story is all around us, passed over, boiled down, and buried by legal silence." The audience leaned in. Backstage later, the press flocked. Shaq held a microphone while Camille answered questions about her legal journey, the scars she carried, and her hopes of inspiring reform in child protection systems. Lennox, squat and fearless, stood between them. He showed off the locket to the cameras, Taylor's photo facing front. One reporter asked why Shaq hadn't known sooner about Camille's family tie. He answered simply, "Because we didn't search deep enough. We let grief be compartmentalized." He spoke about the importance of family visibility, of truth not hidden but honored. The room leaned close. He finished with a promise. "We're more than a story. We're a movement. When they exited together into the cool night, the red carpet crowd pressed closer. Some asked for photos, others for signatures. Lennox giggled as Camille spun him around, his laughter echoing off the civic center walls. Shaq smiled. No public image in that moment, only a father looking at his family rising from shadows into light. In the waiting limo, Shaq pulled Camille close. "You were amazing," he whispered. Camille let him hold her. She'd laid her wounds bare to an audience of thousands, and still stood tall. He squeezed her hand, gratitude more powerful than certainty could ever offer. The next morning's news cycle exploded across national networks and social media. Headlines ran, "Shaq's revelations, family secrets and social justice. Camille Ross, sibling survivor, speaker, from silence to stage, a family's healing and a call for change." Podcasts discussed how wealth and fame often conceal deep-rooted prejudice. Commentators analyzed her story as part of a broader conversation on race, foster care, and injustice. Social media buzzed with support hashtags like Family Truth and Camille's Voice trended. Parents thanked her for giving them courage to share hidden truths. Advocates used the moment to call for policy reviews. Shaq watched it all unfold from home, standing with Camille and Lennox in the sunlit living room. They held hands as messages poured in, supportive emails, letters from families with similar experiences, invitations to speak on national panels, offers to expand Camille's work in child advocacy. Their phones buzzed until the battery ran low. He looked at them then. Camille, the sister he never knew, Lennox, the boy whose cry brought them here. The story they'd shared had shifted not only their family, but public consciousness. Shaq brushed a soft kiss to Lennox's temple and tipped Camille's chin upward. "You changed hearts," he said. Camille smiled. "Real now, unguarded." "We changed hearts," she replied. In the days that followed, they attended follow-up interviews. Shaq joined Camille on a televised town hall discussing child welfare inequities. Lennox had a small cameo, reading a poem he'd written about what family meant to him. During breaks, he ran to Camille, hugged her, and told her, "You're more than Aunt Camille. You're my hero." Shaq watched them from the front row, feeling a surge of something new. Not just pride, not just love, but something revolutionary. Healing through revelation. He realized sometimes the hardest stands weren't on courts or business stages, but under lights that crack open silence and demand truth. Back at the mansion that weekend, they gathered in the living room. No cameras, no press, just home. The locket sat open on the mantel, a beacon of the journey they'd begun. Lennox sat between them, sketching their faces, as a family born again in bravery. Shaq studied the image, thinking of shadows, resilience, and love's redemptive power. A movement began that day in the Civic Center. But for them, the real revolution was closing the distance between souls. Those of mother, sister, child, and giant-hearted father. They stood not as puzzle pieces, but as a whole portrait of truth, love, and unshakable belonging. In the silence of the home, the world felt different. In the mansion, once a house of echoes, now felt like a place where truth lived. The week after the televised event felt lighter, even gentle. A dawning hush after a storm's roar. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, painting soft gold across the living room, where the family gathered for breakfast. The once empty chairs around the grand table were now occupied by voices, warmth and chatter. For the first time in years, the mansion felt like a home, not a showpiece. Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal sat at the head of the table, looking across at Camille, now formally part of the family. Lennox reached for his aunt's hand and squeezed it affectionately. He'd begun to call her Auntie Camille. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just love. Camille's smile held a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet pride. She scooped up a slice of French toast, her eyes meeting Shaq's with unspoken gratitude. "More syrup?" she asked Lennox. Shaq drizzled syrup over his son's toast and ruffled Camille's hair. "We're good," she replied, her voice steady but warm. The air hummed with comfort and belonging. Later that day, paperwork lay neatly organized on Shaq's home office desk. Adoption papers, legal documentation recognizing Camille's rightful place in their family. Shaq sat beside her, their pens poised in front of the documents. He watched her exhale softly before she signed. Then he followed. As he stamped the final signature, their eyes met, and he saw in her face the same mixture of release and new beginnings he'd felt the night they went public. Outside, Lennox trotted into the room. clutching the silver locket. "It's official now," he declared quietly. Camille knelt down, let him hold the locket, and closed it with care. "Yes," she said. "Auntie's official." Lennox beamed. Shaq rose and hugged them both, holding them to him tightly. He pressed a kiss to Camille's forehead and whispered, "Welcome home." The day moved quietly onward. An unplanned afternoon at the zoo. A dinner cooked together. No speeches, no cameras, only family. Shaq watched as Camille whispered to animals in Lennox's ear, guided him gently closer to the penguins, laughed when he imitated the giraffes. When they returned home, the mansion's corridors echoed with laughter and footsteps, not emptiness. That night, as Camille helped tuck Lennox into bed, Shaq hovered in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching the peace in his son's eyes, the same eyes that had once only known fear and confusion. Camille placed a gentle kiss on Lennox's forehead and whispered, "Dream, sweet little one." She turned and caught Shaq's gaze. In that look, gratitude and partnership passed between them. Shaq closed the door behind him and leaned against it, evening shadows softening around him. He walked through the house, past the portraits of Taylor and Camille, stopping where the locket lay on the mantel. He reached out, touched the silver, and sighed. A slow stream of emotion released. Pride in his son, love for Camille, sorrow for the words left unsaid to Taylor. He looked at the framed photo. Taylor's smile, Camille's presence now included. He whispered, "I'm sorry I waited so long." The next morning, they gathered in the study for a quiet family meeting. Shaq stood by the fireplace, voice heavy with emotion. "I'm proud," he began, "of the honest place we're in now. But I need to say this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't dive deeper sooner. I should have known her story before now. I should have seen her sooner." Camille placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You never denied me," she said softly. "You just didn't know. But you made space to learn." Lennox sat between them, clutching his aunt's hand. Shaq looked at the boy. "Your aunt is as much your parent as I am. And I'm grateful." He took their hands, forming a circle of trust, belonging and love. Over the following weeks, the mansion's rhythm settled around this new unity. Mealtimes were less beset by grief, and more by stories, campus tales from Camille's childhood, light-hearted memories, Taylor's favorite family recipes practiced by all of them. Shaq joined Camille's advocacy work, hosting workshops at the estate for foster care reform, anti-racism programs, and storytelling events for children. Lennox helped too, offering his simple view on family. Shaq often found himself walking through the hallway, pausing at the study where the locket remained, open, spotlighted by afternoon light. He thought of his past awards and accolades now shadowed by the revelation that true legacy was built on integrity, not fame. He looked at their family portrait, Shaq, Camille, Lennox, and felt a profound gratitude. That tenderness, distilled from grief, forgiveness, and newfound connection, shaped a family stronger than any basketball record could hold. One evening, he sat with Camille on the veranda, the ocean breeze tousling their hair. They spoke quietly, their conversation meandering through parenting, past injustices, shared hopes. Shaq admitted, voice soft, "Some nights I wonder what Taylor's proudest of." Camille took his hand. "She'd be proud of us," she said. "Proud we brought truth home." Their hands lingered together as dusk deepened. Inside, Lennox's laughter echoed through the halls, proof that the mansion had become what it always should have been. A home made by love, truth and belief in one another. Shaq looked up at the stars and whispered a promise to be better, to stay open, to honor every silent soul, waiting for their story to matter. For in the calm after the storm, he realized he'd found not just peace, but the purpose that had eluded him before, a family, whole and rising from truth's fragile ground. The sun draped its late morning warmth across the courtyard, casting soft golden light onto the tiles and setting the magnolia trees in a gentle sway. A breeze carried the faint scent of orange blossom, fluttering the linen curtains framing the open glass doors to the playroom. Inside, laughter echoed, not the timid giggle of a child, unsure of his place, but the full-bodied joy of a boy who knew he was home. Lennox ran in circles, a cape fashioned from a bath towel trailing behind him, his small sneakers squeaking as he darted across the floor. Camille stood in the center of the room, arms folded, watching him with a wide grin and mock seriousness. "Captain Lennox, your mission is incomplete," she called. "You left the cereal box empty and didn't replace it." Lennox gasped dramatically and fell to the carpet with a spin, clutching his chest. "Auntie Camille, I failed the mission." She rushed over, knelt beside him, and they burst into a shared fit of laughter. Just beyond the archway, Shaq stood quietly, one shoulder against the doorframe, arms crossed. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He watched. And in watching, he healed. The boy who had once trembled through the night now lit up every room he entered. His cries were no longer haunted, but playful, a siren of imagination, of safety, of joy. Camille moved with him like she'd always been there. She caught him mid-sprint, spun him into the air, and the sunlight caught them just so, casting shadows that almost mirrored a memory long buried. Taylor, lifting Lennox in that exact same spot, her laughter bright and unfazed. Shaq's throat tightened. It wasn't pain anymore. It wasn't grief. It was relief. He stepped forward, slowly, hands resting in his pockets. Camille turned toward him with a soft smile, Lennox still laughing in her arms. "He's showing off again," she teased. "Like his dad," Shaq replied, a half-smile tugging at his lips, full of drama. Lennox wriggled free and rushed over to him. "Dad, I'm a hero now," he said proudly, breathless. "Auntie Camille gave me a mission, and I completed it. I saved the world with a banana." Shaq chuckled and lifted his son effortlessly into his arms. "That's how the best heroes do it, silent, stealthy, and slightly fruity." They all laughed again, and for a moment the mansion felt like it was exhaling, like its walls, long silent, were finally learning to breathe again. Later that afternoon, the three of them gathered outside under the pergola, where birds chirped overhead and wind chimes whispered quietly in the breeze. Lennox sat cross-legged on a cushion, coloring a picture of their family. Camille was in it, of course, right between him and Shaq, with a small heart drawn over her head. Shaq watched in silence, letting the image sear into his mind. He looked at Camille, then spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. "That day, when I first heard him cry, I thought it was about missing Taylor. I thought it was grief." Camille looked over, waiting. "But it wasn't," he said. "Not fully. It was something else, something deeper. A cry from a place I didn't even know existed in him. A call for something I couldn't give. And I think," he hesitated, "I think it was calling you." Camille looked down, emotion flickering across her features like sunlight over water. "I heard it too," she whispered, "and I didn't know what it was at first. But the moment I saw him, I felt it, like I'd been waiting to hear him, and he'd been waiting for me." They let the silence speak, then comfortable, full, sacred. In the hush, birds chirped and leaves rustled. Lennox hummed to himself, content and focused, crayons sliding softly against paper. Inside, the house buzzed with new energy. A small wall near the family room now featured framed photos. Taylor, Camille, Lennox and Shaq, side by side, not divided by time or loss, but bound by love. The silver locket sat open in a display box beneath the pictures, a symbol of the secret that broke them open and brought them back together. The media storm had quieted. Public conversations sparked by Camille's story still rippled in national dialogue. But the family had turned inward now, building their own peace, not curated for cameras, but shaped by truth. Their days weren't dramatic anymore. And that was the gift. Mornings were filled with French toast and pajamas. Afternoons held quiet lessons and spontaneous backyard water fights. Evenings ended with shared stories and songs that only hearts connected by pain and healing could truly understand. One evening, after Lennox had gone to bed, Shaq and Camille sat out on the back patio again. The stars were out in full, dotting the sky like promises. Shaq leaned back, gaze upward. "You know, when Taylor passed, I thought I had to fill the silence with movement, just keep going, for him, for me, but I was wrong. What I needed was to sit in the silence and let someone else step in." Camille didn't respond at first. She reached over, placed her hand over his, and simply said, "We can't outrun truth, but we can walk with it." He nodded slowly. The house behind them was quiet, not empty, just resting. Shaq looked out across the lawn, where Lennox had played that morning, tape flying in the wind, Camille chasing after him barefoot. "I used to think cries were signs of something broken," he said, "but maybe they're not. Maybe a cry is just a call for something true to come find you." Camille smiled, and someone did. The stars continued to shimmer as they sat in shared silence, the kind only survivors know, those who've crossed grief's hardest borders and come out still believing in love. Inside, Lennox turned in his sleep, the moonlight kissing his face. He was no longer the boy who cried from a place of loss. He was now the boy who laughed from a place of knowing. And just down the hall, the woman who once lived in shadows rested in a room that now bore her name. The mansion had answered the cry, and in its halls, truth echoed with quiet grace, no longer burdened, but belonging. What if the story you just felt wasn't fiction, but a mirror? Every family has a truth buried, a name lost, a silence waiting to be broken. This isn't just one family's healing. It's a reminder that history lives in the shadows we don't question. Lean into the stories that dare to tell the whole truth. Because sometimes, the cry isn't for help. It's a call to remember.